The wind howled through the skyscrapers of Boston, carrying the icy mist of a December storm. Rain poured mercilessly, each drop striking the shimmering pavement, with a heavy sound, blending with the distant car horns, into a chaotic symphony of loneliness and despair. Alice Sanders stood beneath the awning of Memorial Hospital, her thin lab coat clinging to her soaked body hair, tangled eyes swollen red. The neon lights reflected off her pale face, which once brimmed with hope, now hollowed by pain and exhaustion. 10 minutes earlier, her husband David Sanders had left her standing in the parking lot under the rain after another argument. Once again, he'd called her useless, sneering that her job as a nurse brought nothing but exhaustion and laughable paychecks. "You need to understand, Alice," he'd said, gripping the steering wheel as if restraining his temper. "I need a realistic wife, not some bleeding heart who saves people but can't save money." Then the car sped off, taillights fading into the downpour. She trembled not from the cold, but from the familiar ache of abandonment. Her father had left on a night just like this. She was 8, standing by the window as his car disappeared into the mist. Since then, every time it rained, Alice's heart would tighten, fearing history might repeat itself, and tonight it had. She tried pulling out her phone to call a cab, but the screen flickered and died, battery drained. The pounding rain on the tin awning mixed with the cutting wind, soaking her through. "How ironic," she muttered. "A nurse who saves lives can't even save her own marriage." With no other choice, she started walking toward the staff parking area, hoping to find shelter. But a fierce gust slapped her face when she stepped out, and the rain came down like whips. Through the sheets of water, she noticed a flicker of light ahead, a black sedan, sleek and still, hazard lights blinking like a signal in the dark. She bit her lip. "Probably someone's rideshare," she murmured. But the cold gnawed at her bones. Instinct won over caution. She ran toward the car shoes slipping on wet concrete and yanked open the rear door without thinking. Warm air rushed out, mixed with the scent of leather and a hint of masculine cologne. She sighed with relief, slamming the door shut and leaning back against the seat. "Thank God," she gasped. "I thought I was going to freeze to death out there." But then she looked up and froze. A man was sitting beside her in the back seat. The soft glow from the dashboard traced the sharp lines of his face, so defined, so cold, it made her heart stutter. His eyes, steel gray and stormy, locked onto hers, wordless, unreadable. I'm sorry," she stammered. "I thought this was my car. I just needed to get out of the rain." "Don't move." The voice was deep, velvet smooth, but carried a command that brooked no defiance. She froze. And then she saw it, his hand pressing against his side, blood spreading through his once white shirt. "You're hurt," her professional instinct kicked in. She dug through her bag for a pair of sterile gloves. "You need a hospital right now." "I work at Memorial. I can help." "No hospital." His tone was sharp, slicing through her words. The driver in front, a middle-aged man in a suit, glanced back, waiting for orders. "Take us home," the wounded man said quietly. "Now. But sit still." Just 2 words, but they fell like lead. The car veered off the main road, gliding through the shadowed streets. Only the sound of rain drumming against the roof filled the silence. Alice sat rigid, heart hammering. She wanted to reach for the door, but the sight of blood seeping through his shirt anchored her in place. Whoever this man was, she knew he wasn't ordinary. The air inside the car thickened with the mingled scents of blood and expensive cologne, a mix both alluring and dangerous. "You're losing blood," she whispered. "If we don't stop it soon?" "Do you know who I am?" he asked without looking at her. "No," she replied honestly. "But I know you'll die if I don't treat you." A faint smirk ghosted across his lips. "You talk like you're giving orders. I'm used to saving lives, not watching people die in front of me." This time, he turned his gaze on her entirely. Under the dim light, his face looked carved from marble, strong, proud, and hiding 1,000 secrets. "What's your name?" "Alice Sanders. Your husband's name is David Sanders." She stiffened. "How do you know that?" He didn't answer. He just leaned back, eyes closing, jaw tight with pain. The car turned onto a cobblestone road, passing through towering iron gates. Through the rain, she saw it, a sprawling mansion glowing with golden light surrounded by whispering maple trees. The sight made her chest tighten. It felt like stepping into another world of wealth, power, and danger. The driver stopped. Two men in black suits rushed to open the door, helping the injured man out. He motioned for Alice to follow. She hesitated. "Who are you, Christopher Martinez?" he said, lips curving faintly. "And from the moment you stepped into my car, you stopped being a stranger." The living room was so vast that it made her dizzy. Everything gleamed, from the golden light cascading over the white fur carpet to the massive oil painting hanging above the fireplace. But despite its beauty, the place didn't feel safe. It felt like a beast's lair, elegant but capable of devouring her whole. Christopher sat on a long leather couch, shirt soaked in blood. Instinctively, Alice rushed to him, kneeling beside him. "The bullet grazed your side. Not vital. I need antiseptic and sutures." "Is there a medical room here?" He raised a brow, half amused, half surprised, down the right hall. She worked quickly with steady hands and precise movements. His eyes never left her face. "You're not afraid of me, are you?" "Alice Sanders?" "Of course I am. Then why are you still here?" "Because I'd rather regret helping than regret walking away." A rare smile touched his lips, tinged with pain and respect. When she tied the last stitch, she wiped the dried blood from his skin. "You'll live. But you need rest for at least 3 days. And you?" "Me. I'll go home." "Home?" His brow arched. "You mean the place where your husband left you in the rain?" She clenched the medical kit. "You don't know what happened. I know more than you think." He pulled out his phone, tapping the screen. "David Sanders owes over 40 grand. Gambling, borrowed from people who don't like being cheated." Alice froze. "How do you know that?" "Because they called me," he said calmly, begging for more time. "And you? No one begs me twice." Her stomach turned cold. Despite the pain, he stood towering over her. His large hand tilted her chin until she met his piercing silver gaze. "You saved me tonight, Alice. I'll repay that debt." "There's no need." "Oh, but there is." His tone darkened low and absolute. "Because from this moment on, your world is no longer safe." That night, Alice was given a room on the upper floor, a luxurious suite with windows overlooking a fog-laced garden. She sat on the bed, still trembling, mind-spinning. Part of her wanted to believe it was all a dream, a feverish blur of rain blood, and a man with eyes like storms. But the stains on her sleeve were real. The faint smell of antiseptic still lingered. And somewhere downstairs, Christopher Martinez spoke softly on the phone, his voice calm yet lethal, like a blade gilded in gold. "No one touches her," he said. "Not a single hair on her head." By morning, pale sunlight slipped through the curtains. Alice awoke to find a brand new phone on her nightstand, a sleek iPhone unmarked, no passcode. Only one number was saved in the contacts, CM. She stared at it, heart pounding. The storm outside had passed. But deep down, she knew another one far more dangerous and intoxicating had just begun. When a woman walks into the storm, she might lose everything or find herself. If you've ever stood in the rain trembling between fear and choice, stay a little longer, because sometimes destiny begins the moment you think you've lost it all. Mornings in Boston were unlike anywhere else. The weak sunlight filtered through the mist, glinting off the glass towers like the city wrapped in a sheet of cold silk. On the top floor of the Martinez estate, Alice Sanders stood by the window, gazing down at the dew-laden garden below. The sky remained gray and heavy, but inside, everything gleamed bright, opulent, and so overwhelming it made her feel out of place. The cream-colored silk dress Rosa, the elderly housekeeper, had brought her fit so perfectly that it was unsettling. "Mr. Martinez said you'd need a change of clothes," Rosa explained gently. "You can't stay in that wet nurse's uniform forever." Alice only nodded. Everything had happened too fast. Just the night before, she'd been an exhausted nurse on an overnight shift. Now she was a guest, perhaps even a captive, in the home of a man so powerful no one dared utter his name in a normal tone. She hadn't processed it all yet. All she knew was that last night she had saved him from bleeding out. And he, Christopher Martinez, had saved her from a world she hadn't even realized was closing in on her. The door opened softly. Christopher entered without warning. Gone was the blood-soaked shirt. He was immaculate now. Black suit, white shirt, a silver tie, as if last night's wound had never existed. His presence changed the air in the room, heavier, denser, as though every breath needed his permission. He said, "You're up earlier than I expected," his voice rough but steady. "I don't sleep well in strange places," she replied, taking a small step back. His eyes swept over her slowly, calculatingly, as if reading her thoughts individually. "Did Rosa take good care of you?" "Yeah, thank you." "Call me Christopher, we're not that close." He chuckled lightly, though his eyes didn't soften. "You stitched me 8 times, Alice. Trust me, few people touch my blood and still keep their distance." A shiver crept up her spine. Not fear, something heavier drawn from the calm weight of his tone. "Who are you really?" she asked bluntly. "From what I've seen, you're not just a businessman." Christopher was silent for a few seconds, as if deciding how much truth to offer. Finally, he said, "I solve problems that the law isn't fast enough to handle." "Be more specific." "More specifically, and you wouldn't want to hear it." He poured coffee, the rich aroma filling the room. His movements were graceful, unhurried, so much so that she almost forgot he'd been close to death hours before. "Where is David, your husband?" "Alice, I don't know. He owed dangerous people money." "I erased that debt." She stiffened. "Why would you do that? To see how you'll repay me?" The words struck her like a blade. "I have nothing. I'm just a nurse." "You have something money can't buy, trust." His silver eyes locked onto hers, reflecting something she couldn't name. "And I want you to trust me." Alice shook her head. "I can't. All I know about you is that you're good at giving orders and hiding secrets." "My world runs on secrets, Alice. Without them, people die. And I live to save lives, not bury them." Christopher smiled an actual smile for the first time. "That's why I need you to stay." That afternoon, Alice decided to slip away. She didn't want to owe him anything. She didn't want to be watched by unseen eyes at every step. But just as she reached the iron gates, 2 black SUVs blocked her path. A tall man stepped out, leather jacket tattoos curling up his neck. He eyed her with a thin smile. "You're Alice Sanders. David Sanders is your husband, right?" Before she could answer, the gates behind her opened. Christopher appeared, not loud, not rushed, but his presence froze the air. "She's under my protection," he said, voice low and steady. "Mr. Martinez," the man sneered, bowing slightly. "We want to remind David's lovely wife that his debt isn't cleared. I've paid off everything he owed. Some debts aren't settled with money." "Oh," Christopher's eyebrow arched. "Then how, blood?" His eyes turned to ice. A slight nod, and 2 men in black suits stepped forward. Everything happened so fast that Alice couldn't even register it in 10 seconds. The intruders were subdued and dragged away, vanishing beyond the trees. Christopher turned back to her, his tone softer, but still sharp as a blade. "Never leave these gates without me, Alice." She stepped back, lips trembling. "What did you do to them? Ensured they'll never mention you again. How?" "You don't need to know." She stared at him. The man who had been her patient hours ago, now transformed into something else powerful, dangerous, bound to a private code she couldn't understand. That night, Alice couldn't sleep. The storm had passed, but its echo still beat inside her head like a second heart. She crept downstairs past the long hallways into the library. Christopher was seated at a mahogany desk, lamplight casting half his face into gold shadow. His eyes stayed on a file, but he looked up when he heard her footsteps. "Can't sleep." "No," she whispered. "Have you ever killed someone, Christopher?" The question dropped like a stone into a still lake. He didn't answer at once. Slowly, he put his pen down, then lifted his gaze to hers. "What do you think I am?" "I don't know. But I know you can't rescue me from the rain and make 2 men disappear with a single word. This world isn't divided the way you think, Alice. Some people are born to save others, to end the ones who cause suffering. I chose the latter. You justify sin with noble reasons. And you," he countered softly, "what justifies you staying in the house of a dangerous man?" She stayed silent. He rose, coming closer. His scent, wood and smoke, cold and expensive, slipped into her breath. "You can leave if you want," he said. "But know this, the people after David won't stop. You're the only leverage he has left." Her hands gripped the edge of the desk, feeling the world crumble. Why me? Why are you protecting me? His hand brushed her hair lightly, a touch so gentle it hurt. Because I know what happened to your father. She froze. What did you say? 7 years ago, your father, Dr. Thomas Sanders, didn't die of heart disease as the report claimed. He was murdered. And the man who ordered it is the same one who is hunting David now. Alice collapsed into a chair, her face white. Memories surged: the sudden death of her father, the vague police explanations, the hospital's silence. No, that can't be true. Christopher sat opposite, her eyes locked on hers. You think only David owed them. Your father was their private physician. He uncovered a series of illegal surgeries tied to money laundering through medical foundations. He refused to stay quiet. He left evidence. You know where it is. Most of it's gone. Only one piece remains on a hard drive he sent to someone. At the hospital where you work. The air thickened. You're saying everything I've been through, the debt, the storm, even meeting you, wasn't an accident. Nothing is an accident in this world, Alice. His gaze deepened, voice dropping. I didn't meet you by chance. I've been watching you for 3 months. Her heart stilled. You were following me to make sure they didn't get to you first. So what are you, a savior or a predator? He chuckled. Maybe both. The night stretched on in silence. When Alice returned to her room, her mind spun with questions. The truth about her father, David, and the man downstairs left her unsure what was real and what was an illusion. She looked out the window. Snow had begun to fall, the first flakes of winter light and white as memory. A strange feeling stirred inside her, not quite fear but curiosity, a pull toward understanding the man who had entered her life like a storm. The next morning, Christopher waited in the dining room. The light glinted off his dark hair, making him look distant and impossibly magnetic. You should take a few days off, he said as she sat down. Your hospital is under investigation. Investigation for what? Funding fraud. They're going to dig up what your father touched. And you? Are you involved? The man who killed your father is my old adversary. She stared at him, eyes clear as a winter lake. You're pulling me into your war, Christopher. No. He set his coffee cup down, gaze deep. You've been in it all along, you didn't know. Alice rose to leave, but his hand closed gently around her wrist. The touch wasn't strong, but it stopped her breath. Don't leave me, Alice, he said, voice low, almost pleading. If you walk out of here, they won't just kill you. They'll take from me the one person I still can't bear to lose. She studied him for a long time. Those eyes, once cold and merciless, now held something human, a flicker of vulnerability, a fragment of truth. Are you sure? You're not confusing saving me with possessing me? She asked softly. Christopher lowered his head slightly, a bitter, beautiful smile touching his lips. With you, Alice, I'm not sure of anything anymore. Outside, the snow fell thicker, blanketing the estate gates. And inside the vast house, 2 people, one running from her past, one haunted by power, began to orbit each other where only a breath separated love and darkness. The Martinez estate sat far from the heart of Boston, deep in the northern outskirts, where pine forests stretched endlessly toward the hills. At dawn, pale light pierced through the silver mist, spilling across the tall windows of the reading room, where Alice Sanders sat with a cup of cold tea before her. She hadn't slept. Everything Christopher had said still echoed in her mind, like a discordant melody. Her father was murdered, David was being hunted, and Christopher himself had been watching her for 3 months. She gazed out into the fog-laced garden, her hand trembling slightly as she set the cup down. What he'd revealed had shattered every foundation of belief she'd built her life upon. For years, she had lived in the illusion of safety, a world where the law clearly separated right from wrong. But now that line had blurred beyond recognition. The door opened softly. Christopher walked in wearing a black shirt and a thin bandage still wrapped around his side. The wound had improved, but his steps still carried a faint heaviness. He looked weary, yet still commanding, always in control, even when the world was not. You didn't eat breakfast, he said in that deep, quiet tone. I'm not hungry. Because of me or because of the truth? Alice lifted her gaze, eyes wary. I don't know which is worse. He came closer. The familiar scent of cedarwood and smoke lingered around him, thickening the air between them. I know I've told you too much too fast. You haven't had time to believe any of it. But if I told you I'm trying to save you from the very thing David dragged you into, would you believe me? You talk like you're the hero, she said faintly, the corner of her lip twitching. But from where I stand, you're part of that same world. Maybe, but the difference is I don't lie to you. His eyes held hers, sharp, hypnotic, and disturbingly sincere. Alice turned away, her gaze falling to a small notebook she had brought from the hospital, filled with patient notes, fragments of a life that now felt a lifetime away. Was David really involved in my father's death? She whispered. Not just involved. He was the last person to touch the evidence your father left behind. Her heart constricted. What do you mean? Christopher strolled to the liquor cabinet and poured himself a glass of whiskey. His voice came out low and steady like wind against glass. Thomas Sanders, your father kept private medical files on certain patients. Among them was a group of children funded by the MedCorp Foundation. But MedCorp was only a facade for an international money laundering network. Your father discovered that and planned to expose it, but he never got the chance. After his death, every file disappeared. 2 years later, David Sanders, an ordinary construction worker, suddenly had enough money to invest in MedCorp. Alice's breath caught. You're saying David used my father's evidence to make money? Not just to make money, he sold it. She shot up from her chair, palms pressed to the table, voice shaking. No, you're wrong. David may be flawed, but he isn't that kind of man. Christopher didn't flinch. He set the glass down and stepped closer. You want proof? He handed her a thick white envelope unmarked. Alice opened it with trembling fingers. Inside were photographs, grainy surveillance stills. David was in a dimly lit bar, shaking hands with a man she didn't recognize. Another image is David leaving MedCorp's office with a thick envelope clutched. This is fake, she whispered more to herself than to him. You could have staged all of this. If I wanted to deceive you, Alice, I wouldn't bother with proof. I'd tell you what you want to hear. His tone was soft, but it sliced like winter wind. She gripped the photo tightly, her pulse roaring in her ears. Memories collided nights. David claimed he was working late, the smell of liquor on his clothes, the strange tension in his eyes when she asked about money. Each fragment fell into place, forming a picture she'd been too afraid to see. Christopher studied her quietly for a long time, then spoke calmly. I know you still want to believe in the good, but the world doesn't run on goodness, Alice. It runs on power. And David sold his soul for a taste of it. She lifted her chin, voice trembling. And what about you? What did you trade for your power? Something shifted in his eyes for the briefest moment, the mask of control cracking, revealing exhaustion, maybe even sorrow. I chose you, he said quietly. And that's the one choice I still don't know what it will cost me. That afternoon, Christopher left the estate to handle a situation in Manhattan, as he called it. Alice stayed behind with Rosa and a few security guards. But the silence in the mansion pressed on her like a weight she couldn't bear. She couldn't sit still. His words replayed in her mind like an open wound. She needed the truth from David himself. She went to Christopher's study. Everything inside was arranged with unnerving precision books, by color files tagged by code. But what caught her eye was the computer screen still on, glowing softly. Dozens of encrypted folders filled the desktop, and in the middle of the screen, a single unsent message Christopher confirmed. David Sanders remains in Petrov's custody. Do not act until I return. Alice froze. David is alive. A chill ran through her body. She scrambled through a few more files, finding spreadsheet surveillance data, and one document that made her blood run cold, her name listed under temporary witness protection. What are you doing here? The voice behind her made her jump. Rosa stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable. I was checking Christopher's medical file to ensure his wound's healing. Rosa's gaze lingered for a moment, then she nodded slowly. I'll tell him you looked in. But a word of advice, Miss Sanders, there are doors that once opened can never be closed. Drizzle hung in the air by late afternoon, turning the sky slate. Alice wandered into the garden, her breath fogging in the cold. Beneath the shedding maple trees, the world felt unreal, like a dream she couldn't wake from. She still remembered the first night she met Christopher, how his eyes had looked at her cold and tender, as if two men lived behind one face. But now in her hand was a printed note from his computer. She couldn't stop staring at the words, "David Sanders remains in Petrov's custody." He had lied to her. David wasn't dead. And if he was in Petrov's hands, he was a pawn in something far bigger than either. She took a shaky breath and pulled out her phone, calling her old hospital. Her colleague, the head nurse, picked up immediately. "Oh my God, Alice! Where have you been? The police have been looking for you. Why, they said someone hacked into the hospital's patient database using your account. There were files about the MedCorps children, including those cases your father worked on. They think it was you." The blood drained from Alice's face. Someone had used her name to get to her father's evidence. "Thank you," she whispered. "Please don't tell anyone I called." She ended the call, her fingers tightening around the phone. Something was moving behind the scenes, and she was the bait. By the time Christopher returned, night had fallen. His coat was still damp from the rain. "You went outside," he said, noticing the wet hem of her dress. "Yes. I needed to think. About what? About the fact that you lied to me." The air thickened instantly. Christopher didn't respond immediately, just watched her, silent and unreadable. "I don't know what you think you found." "David. He's alive. I saw your message." His eyes darkened, though his voice remained calm. "You shouldn't have gone into my study. You shouldn't have lied." They faced each other like two opposing storms. Finally, Christopher spoke, his tone low. "I didn't lie. I didn't tell you everything. David's alive, yes, but he's no longer the man you knew. Petrov owns him now. And you expect me to believe that I have proof, but you won't want to see it. Please show me." He sighed, then took out his phone and opened a video file. The footage was grainy security camera quality. David sat in a dark room, hands bound, but his eyes weren't fearful. They were cunning. A Russian-accented voice spoke from behind the camera. "Petrov, you'll do exactly as we say. Alice will believe you. And then we'll take what her father hid." Alice clapped a hand to her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. "No, he wouldn't. He couldn't." Christopher switched off the video, stepping closer, his voice quiet but unyielding. "He's using you, Alice, just like he used your father." She looked up at him through tears. "How long have you known this?" "Since before I met you. And you still let me believe David was just a man in debt. You wanted me to hurt, didn't you?" "No, I wanted you to see him clearly so you won't have to choose between me and his ghost when the time comes." She trembled, her voice breaking. "You talk as if I belong to you." "No," he said softly, eyes gentling. "But I want to protect you, even if you hate me for it." The contradiction in him tore at her heart. She despised his secrecy, yet she couldn't deny the raw truth in his words. Silence fell between them. Then, unexpectedly, she whispered, "If David is alive and being used by Petrov, then I will find him." Christopher's expression darkened like thunderclouds. "No, I have to. He's the only one who might know what my father left behind." "And you think he'll tell you the truth?" "I don't know. But I have to hear it myself." He clenched his jaw, fighting something inside him. Then he stepped closer. Silver gray eyes shadowing hers. "If you go, I'm going with you. You don't have to. It's not about need. It's not a choice." His voice was no longer a suggestion, it was a command. But beneath the steel in his tone, there was something else, fear. For her. For them both. Alice met his gaze, torn between fear and the fragile thread of trust still binding them. Outside, thunder rumbled across the horizon. The storm was returning. And she understood then, when it broke, not only her past would be exposed, but also the heart of the man called Christopher Martinez would face its reckoning. Night fell early over Boston that day. The sky hung low and heavy clouds, dark as steel, ready to burst. Inside the Martinez estate, soft golden light reflected off the tall windows where Alice Sanders stood, arms folded across her chest, heart weighted by too many questions. She still couldn't comprehend what she had been dragged into. From an ordinary nurse, she had been thrust into a web of secrets and names that sent shivers through anyone who dared whisper them. Petrov MedCorps, and the man who stood between good and evil, Christopher Martinez. Her thoughts had been in chaos since she learned that David was still alive. She couldn't entirely hate Christopher, yet she couldn't forgive him for hiding the truth. And she couldn't ignore the strange pull she felt whenever he was near, that dangerous burning sense of safety and fear intertwined. Christopher returned late that night. He stepped into the living room just past 11, his coat soaked from rain hair tousled, but his eyes as cold and sharp as ever. Alice rose from the couch facing him. "Who did you meet? An old contact of Petrov's." "I needed information. About David and about you." She froze. "Me? Petrov doesn't just want David. He wants you because you're the only person who can access your father's data." "You're saying I'm the target." "You're the prey," he corrected quietly, his tone calm but merciless. "And he won't stop until he gets what he wants." Her knees weakened, and she fell back into the chair. "Why me? I don't know anything about those files." "He doesn't know that. And men like Petrov don't need a reason to kill. They only need an excuse." Christopher stepped closer, resting his hand gently on her shoulder. His touch was firm but careful, part reassurance, part possession. "From now on, you don't leave this house unless I'm with you." "You're giving me orders again," she asked, her voice trembling with anger. "I'm not giving orders. I'm keeping you alive." Alice looked up at him and for the first time saw something behind his stoic composure. Not arrogance, but genuine fear. A man like Christopher never showed emotion. Yet his silver eyes held something fragile in that moment, the quiet terror of losing what he could not replace. That night, Alice couldn't sleep. She stepped out onto the balcony, the cold wind tangling her hair, carrying the scent of rain and the promise of a storm. Below, the security lights flickered in the mist. She noticed a faint glow from the corner of her eye. Christopher's study light was still on. After a moment's hesitation, she went downstairs and knocked. He looked up when she entered, his face unreadable for a beat. "You shouldn't wander alone at this hour," he said. "You're awake too. I never sleep easily when someone is trying to take what's mine. And I'm part of that." "No," he said softly, meeting her eyes. "You're the only thing I'm afraid of losing, and the only thing I can't buy back." The words hit her like a strike to the chest. Christopher rarely spoke tenderly, but when he did, it carried the weight of something raw, stripped of pretense. Alice sat across from him, her eyes scanning the papers strewn across his desk, maps, names, grainy photographs. All of these people, they work for Petrov. Most of them. He doesn't just own money, he owns influence hospitals, politicians, even the police. And you, what do you have to fight him with? Christopher leaned back, a faint sardonic smile curving his lips. What, he'll never have loyalty. She tilted her head slightly. Can a man like you even trust anyone? Not many, he admitted. But enough. He moved to the bar and poured her a glass of warm water. Drink this. You need to calm down. As she took it, her fingers brushed his. It lasted barely a second, but it was enough to make her pulse race. Tomorrow, he said quietly, I'll take you away from here. Where somewhere Petrov can't reach you. And you believe that? Or are you just running? His eyes narrowed. Sometimes running is the only way to stay alive, Alice. I don't want to run. I want to face the truth. And do you really think you're strong enough to face it? Yeah, and she didn't answer. Because he was right. She was terrified. But beneath the fear, one truth burned brighter than ever. She couldn't abandon her father's legacy. She couldn't let what he died for be buried in silence. The next morning, Christopher left early to meet a MedCorps board member. Alice remained with Rosa and 2 guards. She tried to stay composed, but unease pressed against her chest. Near noon, as she read quietly in her room, a faint noise echoed down the hallway. At first, she thought it was Rosa, but the steps were heavier and quicker. Then came a soft, metallic click. Her blood ran cold. She moved toward the door and peered through the gap. A man in a security uniform she didn't recognize was walking toward Christopher's office. Excuse me, she called cautiously. Can I help you? The man turned. His eyes were flat, empty. Without a word, he reached for the gun at his waist. Alice gasped and ran back into her room, locking the door. A gunshot cracked through the air, the door splintered open. She stumbled back, crashing into the bookshelf. Time slowed Rain, hammering the glass footsteps approaching her, heartbeat drumming in her ears. A bullet grazed her shoulder. Hot pain exploding down her arm. She didn't scream. Instinct took over. Grabbing a crystal vase, she hurled it with all her strength. It shattered against the man's face. He faltered just long enough for her to bolt from the room. She sprinted down the corridor, skidding at the staircase, and froze. Rosa was tied to a chair, her mouth sealed with tape. The two guards lay unconscious on the floor. Alice tore the tape from Rosa's lips, hands trembling. The older woman gasped, whispering hoarsely, "Run, Alice. There's a bomb." A faint ticking sound echoed from behind her. Alice turned, saw the red light blinking under a cabinet. Without thinking, she grabbed Rosa's arm and dragged her toward the back door. The explosion came an instant later, a thunderous roar and a burst of fire that swallowed the hallway. The shockwave threw her down the stairs. Her head struck the railing, and everything went black. When she awoke, the world smelled of antiseptic and smoke. She lay in a temporary infirmary, wrapped in blankets, her shoulder bandaged. Outside, rain drummed softly against the roof. Christopher sat beside her, his shirt undone at the collar. Soot smudged across his hands. His eyes were ice-cold, sharp, but beneath that glacial surface burned something raw. Fury, fear, and a fragile relief. "You're reckless, Alice," he said hoarsely. "I told you to stay in your room." "You think I wanted to be attacked?" she whispered weakly. "You're lucky. If that bomb had gone off 10 seconds earlier, you wouldn't be here." She turned away, her voice barely audible. "You knew, didn't you? You knew this would happen." He said nothing, and his silence was answer enough. "You knew," she pressed, tears brimming. "And you still left me here. I didn't expect them to strike so soon. I had men guarding the property." "You had men watching me," she interrupted, her voice breaking. "That's not protection, Christopher. That's control." "What else aren't you telling me?" He bowed his head, jaw clenched. After a long pause, he said quietly, "Petrov doesn't just want the data. He wants you because you're the daughter of Thomas Sanders, the man who betrayed him." Alice froze. "Betrayed him?" "Your father once worked with Petrov. They built the MedCorp Foundation together. But when your father discovered Petrov was using it to launder money, he tried to expose him. That's why he was killed." Her blood went cold. All her life, she'd believed her father was an honest man, a healer to his last breath. Now that the truth fractured before her eyes, Christopher's voice softened, almost sorrowful. "I'm not telling you this to dishonor him. I want you to understand why Petrov will never stop hunting you." "And you," she whispered, eyes glassy, "why are you helping me out of duty, or because of him?" "Because of you," he said without hesitation. "But to protect you, I must confront the past you've spent your whole life avoiding." Silence fell between them. Only the steady rhythm of rain filled the room. Finally, he rose and brushed a strand of hair from her face, his hand lingering just long enough to feel her trembling breath. "Rest now. I'll take care of the rest." "Where are you going?" "To find whoever planted the bomb." She gripped his wrist weakly. "You'll come back, won't you?" He leaned down, his voice low, a vow, not a promise. "I've never walked away from someone I swore to protect." Their eyes met his, filled with an ache so deep it felt eternal. Then he turned and left. Outside, the storm had fully broken. Thunder tore across the sky like veins of light rain striking the windows in furious rhythm. Alice lay awake, listening to the storm, her pulse, the name that echoed in her chest like a wound she could never close, Christopher Martinez. And as lightning split the horizon, she finally understood the storm outside wasn't what she feared. The real tempest was inside her heart. It was still raining in Boston, the prolonged, bitter rain of January that seemed intent on washing away every trace of the explosion that had destroyed the Martinez estate. The mansion was now nothing more than a heap of charred ruins, fenced off with steel barriers and bright yellow police tape. Yet amid the wreckage, Alice Sanders had survived, and Christopher Martinez hadn't slept a single night since the moment she opened her eyes again. The safe house he had brought her to was hidden deep in Beacon Hill, tucked behind a row of bare maple trees. From the outside, it looked like a quaint brick townhouse. Inside was a fortress bulletproof glass, concealed cameras, and a signal jamming chamber disguised as a storage room. Alice stood by the window, staring at the fog-covered street below, unease swirling in her chest. Ever since Christopher had left the night before, she had felt as if the story of her life was continuing without her, like she had become a spectator in her own fate. He hadn't said where he was going. He had only told Rosa to care for her before vanishing into the night. The door opened just as she was lost in thought. Christopher stepped inside, rain dripping from his black overcoat, his gray eyes glinting beneath the dim light. "Where have you been all night?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Meeting one of your father's old allies," he said quietly, his tone carrying the scent of cold air and cigarette smoke. "The man who helped him hide the last piece of data." She froze. "And what did you find?" "Not the data," he replied slowly, "but a letter." He reached into his inner pocket and drew out a yellowed envelope, its edges sealed with a cracked red wax stamp. In faded, trembling handwriting on the front were the words, "To my daughter, Alice." Her heart clenched. With shaking fingers, she unfolded the letter. The ink was smudged in places, but each word struck like a blade. "My dearest Alice, if you are reading this, it means I am gone. I made the mistake of believing I could defeat evil with good intentions. Petrov is not a man, he is something fed by fear and blood. I tried to walk away, but there is no path back from that world. If you ever find yourself caught in this storm, look for the man bearing the insignia of a serpent coiled around a torch. He is the only ally you can trust. The data I hid is not money. It is proof of a greater crime, the trafficking of children's organs from hospitals under Petrov's control. Do not cry, Alice. I know you are strong. And if someone dares to protect you with their life, trust them even if they belong to the darkness." The letter ended. Alice's tears fell silently onto the page. Christopher said nothing. He placed a hand on her shoulder. "Your father tried to save hundreds of children," he murmured. "He died because he refused to obey Petrov." She looked up at him, eyes red. "And you, Christopher? Are you walking the same path?" He met her gaze, his eyes deep and shadowed. "I'm no hero, Alice. I intend to finish what he started in the only language this world understands." That night, as the wind lashed against the windows, Christopher sat at the desk, watching the footage recovered from Thomas Sanders' encrypted drive. The images flickered with static, but were clear enough. A surgical ward filled with unconscious children tubes and IV lines snaking from their small bodies. A man's voice, cold and detached, echoed through the speakers. "The shipment's ready. Tonight, send them to the southern docks. The payment will be transferred to the Swiss account." Alice covered her mouth, trembling. "Oh, God! Is it real?" Christopher shut the monitor and nodded. "Petrov runs a network of phantom hospitals. This data could destroy him, but it also paints a target on anyone who possesses it." He rose, his tone low and resolute. "From now on, no one can know you're alive. I'll take care of the rest." "What do you mean I'll spread the story that you died in the explosion, a tragic accident? Alice Sanders must disappear so that you can live." She shook her head, voice breaking. "You expect me to hide forever?" "No," he said gently. "I want you to be free, something your father never had." That night, sleep eluded her. The rain outside beat steadily, pulling her back to the night she first met Christopher, that same cold, fateful rain that changed everything. She padded down the corridor and found him in the small library, reading under the dim glow of a desk lamp. The light cast hard lines across his face, making him look carved from stone. "Do you always stay awake like this?" she asked softly. He didn't look up. "Habit. When I lived in Italy, I learned never to sleep deeply. In my world, people die believing the morning will come. But you're still here this morning." He finally lifted his gaze, a faint smile touching his lips. "Because of you." The air between them shifted. His words weren't a confession, they were something more profound, an unspoken truth she wasn't ready to name. "I don't know who I can trust anymore," she whispered. "Trust yourself first," he said, closing the file. "And if you can, trust me." She watched him in silence. His hands, calloused, scarred across the knuckles, looked like they had seen violence. Yet when they brushed her cheek, they were impossibly warm. 2 days later, Christopher left Boston. He said he was going to New York to find the man with the serpent and torch emblem her father had mentioned. Before he left, he told her, "Don't open the door for anyone, no matter their name, even if they say I sent them." That night, the wind howled outside. At 9 o'clock, the doorbell rang, soft, hesitant. Alice's heart tightened. "Who's there?" A woman's voice answered, trembling. "I'm Dr. Yvonne. I used to work with your father at MedCorps. I have something he left for you." The name struck something profound in her memory. Dr. Yvonne. Her father had spoken of her before. Ignoring the unease in her chest, Alice cracked the door open. A middle-aged woman stood on the porch, drenched in rain, her face pale and lips blue from the cold. She pulled a small silver data chip from her coat pocket. "This is what's left of your father's files," she whispered. "Please give it to Christopher Martinez. He's the only one who can finish what your father started." Alice reached out to take it, but a gunshot rang out before she could ask anything. Dr. Yvonne crumpled to the ground, blood spreading across the wet bricks. A second bullet shattered the doorframe beside Alice's head. She slammed the door shut and dove behind the couch. Her breath ragged. Outside, footsteps echoed, several of them. Her mind raced the gun. Christopher had left one in the desk drawer. Hands shaking, she grabbed it, aiming toward the door. When it burst open, she fired. The blast echoed through the small apartment. One man fell. 2 more charged in. She ran, heart-pounding, ducking behind a wall as glass shattered around her. Then a sudden blow to the back of her head. Strong hands grabbed her, muffling her scream. "Easy, Alice," a man's voice whispered. "If I wanted you dead, you wouldn't be breathing." She struggled. "Who are you?" The man pulled back his hood, Marcus Christopher's right hand. "The boss sent me," he said urgently. "Petrov's men found your location." "What about Dr. Yvonne?" Marcus's eyes darkened. "She was being followed. You need to leave now." They fled to an underground parking lot through a hidden tunnel beneath the street. The winter wind hit like knives when they emerged. Alice clutched the data chip tightly to her chest as Marcus drove. One question pulsed through her mind. Does Christopher know what's happening? 2 hours later, they stopped at an abandoned warehouse near the docks. Marcus turned to her. "We'll wait here until the boss arrives." But before he could say more, an explosion ripped through the air. The back door blew inward flames and smoke swallowing the corridor. "They found us!" Marcus shouted. He shoved Alice toward the side exit. "Go now!" She ran. Gunfire erupted behind her. When she looked back, she saw Marcus collapse, blood streaking the floor like spilled ink. Stumbling through the crates, she tripped and fell, the data chip slipping from her grasp. She scrambled to her feet just as footsteps splashed through puddles behind her. Then came the voice, profound, rough, unmistakable. "What a waste, Alice. I plan to let you live longer." She turned. A tall man in a black coat stepped into the light, half his face, shadowed eyes, cold and metallic. "Petrov," she whispered. "That's right. Thomas Sanders' daughter," he sneered. "You're just like him, soft but stubborn. You have something that belongs to me." She backed away, gripping the chip tightly. "This isn't yours. It's evidence. Evidence only matters if the witness stays alive." He raised his gun, but before he could pull the trigger, another shot rang out from behind him. Petrov staggered, clutching his bleeding shoulder. A voice, low and deadly, cut through the rain. "Touch her again, and I'll make sure you never pull another trigger." Through the smoke, Christopher emerged, his black coat whipping in the wind, his eyes like blades of silver. Petrov laughed, blood dripping down his arm. "Always late, Martinez, but never off target," Christopher replied. 2 shots cracked almost in unison. Petrov dropped to the ground. Christopher staggered, a hand pressed against his side. Alice screamed, rushing to him. Warm blood soaked her fingers. "You're hurt." "It's nothing," he panted, a graze. Tears mixed with the rain on her face. "You can't keep doing this. You'll die for me one day." He gave a faint, crooked smile. "And you can't keep waiting for me to save you. Next time, shoot before you shake." She clutched his hand, voice breaking. "I thought you were gone." he murmured, his eyes softening. But every time you're in danger, I find my way back. The rain fell harder. Amid the chaos of gunfire and smoke, they saw nothing but each other, two wounded souls clinging to the only warmth left in a frozen world. Christopher brushed a thumb over her tear-streaked cheek. Don't be afraid, Alice. From now on, no one touches you, not Petrov, not fate itself. In the distance, sirens wailed through the storm. And there, beneath the relentless winter rain, another chapter of their story began. One where the line between love and vengeance, life and loss, had long since disappeared. Boston had grown quiet again after the storm, but the waves hadn't stopped inside Alice Sanders. A week had passed since that night at the docks, the night Christopher Martinez shot Petrov and nearly died in her arms. Now he lay recovering in the penthouse suite on the 42nd floor of the Beacon Sky Hotel, a haven of silence suspended between wars that refused to end. Morning sunlight filtered through the curtains, painting his face in gold. Alice sat beside the bed, a warm cloth gently touching the bandaged wound along his ribs. You still have a fever? She murmured, her voice soft with worry. I've lived through worse, he replied, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. Not everyone's immortal like you, Christopher. Not everyone gives me a reason to survive, Alice. She froze. His eyes lingered on her face, steady, unguarded. Between them, silence was no longer a barrier. It was a thread pulling their hearts closer, slow and unstoppable. Alice turned away, though not fast enough to hide the tremor in her gaze. You should rest. I'll make you something to eat. Can you cook? She glanced back, one eyebrow arched. I'm a nurse, not a cavewoman. He laughed, a rare, genuine sound from a man like him. Its low, rough warmth filled the room, melting the chill that seemed to follow him wherever he went. The penthouse kitchen was sleek, minimalist, almost sterile. But in Alice's hands, it came alive. The scent of ginger and chicken broth rose into the air, carrying warmth into every corner. Christopher, of course, didn't stay in bed. Leaning on a crutch, he stood by the doorway watching her. I'd forgotten a kitchen could smell like something other than gunpowder, he said dryly. Then remember it now, she replied. This is the smell of life. And of family, he added quietly as if lost in a memory. She turned toward him. Did you have a family? A father who thought emotions were a weakness, and a mother who died loving him too much, he said evenly. I learned two things from them. Love can kill, and indifference can too. Alice set the spoon down, studying him. You're wrong, she said softly. Love doesn't kill. Only people who don't know how to protect it do. He fell silent, her words sinking deep. He saw something he'd never been able to name in her calm defiance, gentleness, shaped like courage. That evening after dinner, Alice stepped out onto the balcony. Boston shimmered beneath them, a mosaic of light and rain, unaware that a war was still being fought in its shadows. Christopher came up behind her, draping a thick coat around her shoulders. You don't have to do that, she said. I'm not used to letting people freeze, he murmured, his voice low and warm. The night wind tangled her hair, and he reached to tuck a loose strand behind her ear, a brief, hesitant touch that lingered longer than it should have. What will you do when this is over? He asked. She exhaled. I don't know. I've lost everything, the hospital, my home, even my name. Maybe all I have left is me. That's the most precious thing to start with. And you? She asked. Me? His gaze drifted toward the skyline. I'll finish what Petrov began. There's someone new trying to rebuild his empire, Dmitry Koval-Kruller, who is more intelligent and far more patient. Alice turned to face him. Another circle of vengeance. No, he said quietly. This time, no one else pays the price. She looked into his eyes, eyes that once frightened her, but now felt like the only place she could trust. Then I'm going with you. No, I wasn't asking for permission. Christopher sighed, his voice dropping into a growl. Alice, this isn't a game. They kill without hesitation. I won't put you in their crossfire, and you think I can sit here while you walk into hell alone? She stepped closer, her eyes fierce beneath the city light. You saved me, Christopher. That doesn't mean I'll stand by and watch you destroy yourself. He stared at her, torn between instinct and something far more profound. His whole life had been about control. But with her steady gaze and unbreakable will, this woman made him realize some things were never meant to be controlled. Finally, he said quietly, "If you come, you follow every order I give." Alice smiled faintly. "Deal, boss." The next morning, they left Boston. The black Bentley cut through the coastal highway waves, crashing against the rocks as they drove toward New York. The sky was bright, the wind sharp and salty. Alice watched the ocean blur past her window. "Don't you ever get tired living between two worlds, half savior, half sinner?" Christopher answered without hesitation. "Saving people doesn't wash the blood away. But sometimes it reminds me I'm still human." She turned toward him, her voice a whisper. "You are human, Christopher. You've just been in the dark for too long." He smiled faintly, saying nothing. But something inside him shifted, a glimmer of warmth cutting through the cold armor he'd worn for years. New York greeted them with gray skies and glass towers dripping with rain. Christopher's new base was on the top floor of the Madison One building, disguised as the headquarters of a financial firm. Screens lined the walls displaying encrypted data streams and live satellite feeds. Marcus was already there, his arm in a sling, but his expression steady. "Welcome back, boss," Marcus said, nodding toward Alice. "And welcome to you too, Dr. Sanders, or should I say—" "Just Alice," she said quietly. "The doctor is gone." Christopher moved to the central console. "Dmitry Koval has begun transferring Petrov's Swiss accounts into the US. He's rebuilding the network. If we intercept those transactions, his empire collapses." "And he'll come for you," Marcus added. "I'm counting on it," Christopher replied calmly. Alice stepped closer, scanning one of the maps projected on the wall. "This site is in New Jersey. It's a medical facility. Yes, one of Koval's underground hospitals. You're planning to hit it." "Destroy it," he said flatly before he restarts the organ trade. She looked at him, resolve hardening in her voice. "Then I'm going in as medical staff. You'll need someone who can move inside unnoticed." "No," he said again, sharper. "You told me you wanted to protect innocent lives," she countered. "Then let me do my part." "I know what I'm walking into." Marcus glanced between them, exhaling. "She's right, boss. Nobody knows hospital systems better than she does." Christopher clenched his jaw. After a long pause, he nodded once. "Fine, but I'm going with you. And the moment you hesitate, I pull you out. Deal," she said, her eyes fierce with determination. That night, deep beneath a New Jersey medical complex, the stench of disinfectant and damp air filled Alice's lungs. She wore a white lab coat, her badge forged to perfection. Beside her, Christopher moved with calm precision, disguised as an anesthesiologist. They stepped into the surgical ward and froze. Dozens of narrow beds lined the walls, each holding a child, pale, motionless tubes and IVs snaking from their arms. Alice bit her lip, fighting the wave of nausea. "It's real!" Christopher placed a hand on her shoulder, signaling for silence. He lifted his phone, recording everything proof enough to crash Koval's empire. Then, footsteps echoed down the corridor. A group of men entered, led by a face that stopped Alice's heart. David. He was alive. Not a captive and accomplice. David wore a black suit, his hair cropped short, his eyes cold and unfamiliar. "I knew you'd come, Alice." "David, you never understood," he said calmly. "Your father and I shared the same vision to use the weak to strengthen the strong. Isn't that what saving lives is about, sacrifices?" "You're insane," she whispered. "No," he said softly. "I'm enlightened. Christopher's been using you, Alice, using you to erase the past, to destroy me and Petrov's legacy. But I can give you something he will never have. Come back to me. We can start over the right way this time." She shook her head, stepping back, but Christopher was already between them, his gun raised, his voice cutting through the air like ice. "She's already chosen David. Pray she never changes her mind." David laughed bitterly. "You think you're better than me, Martinez? You kill for love. I kill for a purpose." Before he could draw his gun, Christopher fired. The bullet tore through his shoulder. David fell clutching his wound as alarms blared through the facility. "Go!" Christopher shouted, grabbing Alice's hand. They sprinted through flashing red lights and echoing sirens, smoke already seeping through the vents. Marcus waited by the exit with a truck, yelling over the chaos. Do we have what we came for? We do, Christopher said, tossing him the hard drive. And too many enemies. Alice looked back one last time. David lay bleeding on the floor, eyes dimming under the strobing red lights. What she felt wasn't love, just a hollow ache for the man he once was. As they sped away, the facility behind them erupted into flames, the explosion lighting up the night sky. Alice sat pressed against Christopher's chest, the scent of smoke, blood, and rain filling her lungs. "It's over," she whispered. "No," he said softly, tightening his arm around her. "It's just beginning." She looked up at him, the fire outside reflected in his gray eyes burning like a silent oath. And in that moment between the rush of the wind and her heart pounding, Alice knew she had crossed a line she could never return from. She was no longer the trembling nurse who once stood in the rain. She was Christopher Martinez's partner, the one fragile light in his endless darkness. 3 days after the explosion in New Jersey, the world erupted. News channels everywhere broadcast the anonymous videos exposing the full extent of Medcor's organ trafficking empire. Underground hospitals were raided, and Dmitry Koval vanished from every radar. But for Alice and Christopher, the calm that followed was nothing more than the stillness of water, hiding an undertow silent, deep, and dangerous. They had taken refuge in an abandoned cabin near the shores of Lake Ontario, north of New York. The house smelled of damp pine and cold smoke. The roof leaked, and every floorboard creaked underfoot. There was no signal, internet, or news. Only 2 people and the ghosts of everything they couldn't forget. Morning light filtered through a cracked window landing on the worn wooden floor. Alice sat at the edge of the bed, rebandaging the wound on Christopher's shoulder. The bullet had missed vital organs, but the gash was deep. "You should let me stitch it again," she murmured. "It's worse than you think." "I don't trust nurses who used to work for Medcor," he replied dryly, though his tone carried a flicker of teasing. She shot him a look. "I've saved your life at least twice. Please don't make me regret it." "Fair enough," he said, with a faint grin. "But next time use warmer hands. You trembled so much I thought you were afraid of blood." "I wasn't afraid of blood," she said softly. "I was scared of losing someone I didn't want to lose." The words fell between them, fragile and raw. Christopher didn't answer. He just looked at her for a long time, and something in his gaze cracked something he'd held back for far too long. Finally, he said quietly, "You shouldn't care for someone like me, Alice. I don't have a future. I don't have the right to love anyone." She lowered her hand, her eyes tracing the faint scar that ran diagonally across his chest. An old wound, pale but still alive, like a memory that refused to fade. "Could you stop talking like you're some death sentence waiting to happen?" she whispered. "I don't need someone perfect, Christopher. I need someone honest." He squinted slightly. "And what if that real person has killed? Then he's still human, if he can still feel pain." Her reply silenced him. Outside, the wind sighed through the trees, rustling dead leaves, like a confession neither dared to speak aloud. That afternoon, they went down to the lake. The water was calm, mirroring the gray winter sky. Alice sat on the wooden dock, her feet dipping into the icy water. Christopher watched from behind her, his expression unreadable, a mix of tenderness and distance. He said quietly, "I can't remember seeing anything this peaceful." "Do you know why people like sitting by the water?" she asked. "Because it makes them feel small. Because it reflects everything, even the things we try to forget." She looked down, seeing their reflections ripple together in the water. "I can see you in my eyes," she whispered. "And I'm scared that one day when the water stops reflecting, I'll forget you were ever real." Christopher didn't respond. He stood, took a few steps away, then turned back to her. "If one day I'm gone, Alice, what will you do?" "I'll wait. It's useless, not for someone I believe in." His eyes softened. Then he leaned down, pressing a gentle kiss against her forehead. Slow, deliberate, as if to seal a promise neither dared to say aloud. Night fell. The fire crackled low in the hearth inside the cabin, throwing orange light across their faces. It softened the lines of 2 people who had lived too long in darkness. Wrapped in a blanket, Alice rested her head on Christopher's shoulder. He said nothing, his arm draped loosely around her waist. "Have you ever loved someone before me?" she asked quietly. Yes, he answered without hesitation. A woman who once thought she could save me. In the end, I was the one who destroyed her. Do you regret it? Regret changes nothing. Then at least don't repeat it with me. Christopher gave a low, rough laugh. You're staking your heart on a man who burns everything he touches, Alice. I know, she whispered, voice trembling. But if I'm too afraid to burn, how will I ever know if the fire can warm or destroy me? He looked at her, and for the first time no wall was left between them. When he kissed her, it wasn't rushed or desperate. It was slow, deep a tide pulling them under. His hands tangled in her hair. Her breath mingled with his. The scent of smoke, salt, and skin filled the room. It wasn't desire. It was released. A confession that despite everything, they were still capable of love. As the fire dwindled, Alice whispered, Do you believe some people meet only once, but it's enough to change their whole lives? Christopher's voice was low, almost reverent. Some people meet to redeem the parts of their souls they've already lost. The next morning, when Alice woke, the space beside her was cold. Christopher was gone. On the table lay a single sheet of paper scrawled in his sharp handwriting. Don't look for me. I have to finish this alone. Her chest tightened. She knew exactly what that meant. Dmitri Koval was still alive, and if Christopher had gone to face him alone, one of them would never return. Tears burned her eyes. She clenched the note in her fist, then opened the small wooden box he'd kept hidden under the bed. Inside lay a handgun and a metal tag engraved with the image of a serpent coiled around a torch. The same symbol her father had mentioned in his final letter. She understood now. It wasn't just a mark, it was a path. The last one left to find him. That night on the outskirts of Manhattan, the abandoned Medcor warehouse still stood, its windows shattered and walls scorched from the raid. Now it served as Koval's hideout, where he gathered the remnants of Petrov's men. Christopher entered quietly, black coat trailing behind him like a shadow. Dmitri sat in a chair, his arm bandaged, a thin smile curving his lips. I knew you'd come, he said. To end this, Christopher replied. End this, Dmitri scoffed. You think you're some avenger of justice? You're a killer, Martinez. The only difference between us is that you kill for love and I kill for power. Christopher loaded his gun with a sharp click. Maybe, but at least I know who I'm killing for. The fight broke out fast, the crack of gunfire, the clang of steel, the sound of two men's ragged breaths blending into chaos. Dmitri was strong, fast, merciless, but Christopher had something he didn't, a reason to live. A shot rang out. Dmitri staggered, clutching his shoulder blood blooming through his shirt. You think killing me will save her? He rasped. That woman carries the blood Petrov wanted, the blood of a traitor. You can't protect her forever. Christopher didn't hesitate. He pulled the trigger. Dmitri fell. Silence swallowed the room thick and heavy. But instead of triumph, all Christopher felt was emptiness, a hollowness that no victory could fill. He turned to leave, unaware that someone had been watching the entire time. Alice. She had followed him from the lake, and now seeing him standing over another corpse, she finally understood he had chosen to carry the sin so she wouldn't have to. When he reached the doorway, she stepped out. He froze, eyes wide. You followed me? I was afraid, she whispered, fearful that if I didn't, I'd never see you again. He shook his head, his voice rough. Alice, you shouldn't see this. You think I only love the good in you? She said, stepping closer. Her hand pressed against his chest where Dmitri's blood still clung. I love even the darkness because it proves you still have a heart. He stared at her, torn between desire and guilt, between wanting to keep her and fearing what he'd become. You don't understand, he said hoarsely. I've gone too far. I can't come back. Then I'll go with you. Christopher closed his eyes, exhaling slowly, then pulled her into his arms. You're walking straight into hell, Alice. As long as you're there, she whispered, I won't be afraid. A strained laugh escaped him. You're insane. And you love that, she murmured, smiling through her tears. He kissed her again, a kiss that tasted of smoke, blood, and sorrow. It wasn't forgiveness. It was a surrender, two broken souls clinging to each other in the ruins of the world. That night they left Manhattan. No one knew where they were going. Only the winter wind carried the sound of their departure. Two fugitives bound not by fate, but by choice in the back seat. Alice leaned her head against Christopher's shoulder. He drove silently, the passing streetlights carving shadows across his face, half light, half dark, like the man he had become. "Where will we go now?" she asked softly. "Anywhere without a past," he said. "And if we're lucky, maybe we'll learn to live in the present." Snow began to fall outside, white and silent, covering the blood-stained earth. And for a fleeting moment in the coldest winter of their lives, they knew that at least their hearts had found warmth again. Snow still blanketed the mountains of Vermont, white and endless, like a great shroud laid gently over the world, erasing every scar beneath it. The wooden cabin where Alice and Christopher had stopped to rest lay hidden deep among pine trees, far from noise, far from fear. It had been 2 months since the night they left Manhattan. News of Dmitry Koval's disappearance had faded. MedCorps was under complete federal investigation. The world had moved on, but they hadn't. Their bodies had healed, but the wounds within the kind time could not reach, still ached quietly. Morning sunlight spilled through the window, brushing across Alice's face. She stayed still, listening to the whistle of the wind over the roof and the steady heartbeat beside her. Christopher was still asleep, his face peaceful in a way that seemed impossible for a man who had walked through gunfire loss and shadows. She reached out, tracing the faint scar across his chest, a wound that had nearly taken his life. It was proof of something miraculous, that love could make even the fiercest man fear losing someone. Christopher stirred his lips, curving into a weary but warm smile. "Counting my scars again, counting how many times I almost lost you." "Then you must be tired," he murmured, voice low and rough. "I'm not that easy to kill." She rested her chin on his shoulder and whispered, "I know, but I don't want to test fate anymore." The days that followed were quiet, almost unreal. Alice tended the small garden behind the cabin. Christopher chopped firewood, fixed the leaking roof, and sometimes just sat on the porch watching the snow. They didn't talk about the past. They didn't dare talk about the future. One afternoon, she found him standing silently outside, holding a faded photograph, her father's picture taken with him years ago at a medical conference. "You kept it," she said softly. Christopher replied that he was the only man who ever believed I could be more than what I was. "And you proved him right," she whispered. "He'd be proud of you." He turned to her, the hardness in his eyes softening. "I only managed it because you made me believe something was worth fixing." She was quiet momentarily, then asked, "Have you ever thought about starting over?" "Starting over," he repeated. "Yes, a different life. No Martinez, no guns, no Petrov, no Koval, just you and me." He looked out toward the snow-laden trees, his voice low. "It sounds like a dream, but if I fall asleep in it, will you wake me up?" "I won't," she said, her eyes catching the golden light of dusk, "because I'd want to stay there too." That night, the wind picked up. The fire crackled in the hearth as Christopher sat at the table writing in a small notebook. His handwriting was sharp, deliberate. Alice walked up behind him. "What are you writing?" "A list," he said without looking up. "What kind of list?" "Things I want to do if I still have time." "Can I see?" she asked, smiling. He handed her the page. 1. Teach Alice how to shoot straight. 2. Rebuild the house by the lake. 3. Please write a letter to my mother. 4. Find the child I saved in Rome. 5. Stop running. Alice folded the paper carefully. Add one more. What's that number 6? Learn how to live, not just survive. He looked at her and smiled faintly. That might be the hardest one on the list. The hardest, she said softly, but the one that matters most. A week later, someone found them. The sound of tires crunching over snow broke the morning silence. Christopher stepped onto the porch, his hand instinctively brushing the side of his coat. Old habits die hard. A man in a long coat emerged from the car. It was Marcus. "You found us," Christopher said. His tone caught between relief and wariness. Marcus smirked. "Not too hard, boss. You left clues everywhere, especially the coffee receipts from the lady beside you." Alice laughed under her breath, but the smile faded as Marcus handed Christopher a sealed envelope. This came from the federal office. They're reopening the Medcore case. You've been summoned as a witness. Christopher froze. A witness or a suspect? Marcus replied quietly. Depends on which part of the story they believe. Alice gripped Christopher's hand. You can't go. If they don't trust you, then I'll disappear again, he said calmly. But I'm tired of running. Her throat tightened. You're willing to risk everything to buy justice? No, he said softly, eyes catching the fading orange light. I'm doing it so you can live without fear. The day Christopher left, snow fell thick enough to erase the road. He wore a black coat, gloves, and the quiet determination of a man walking toward fate. Will you come back? Alice asked from the doorway, her voice trembling. Will you wait? He asked in return. Always. He leaned forward, kissing her forehead. If I don't return, don't cry. Because for once, I'll have lived right because of you. She didn't speak. She held him tightly, afraid he'd vanish into the storm if she let go. Then he walked away. His car disappeared into the white, leaving only 2 deep tire tracks on the snow-covered road. 2 months later, Alice worked at a small clinic in Burlington. She no longer bore the name Sanders, new papers. A new life, a new name, Alice Green. Her days were filled with children, fragile, sick, beautiful, the kind her father had once devoted his life to saving. But each time snow began to fall, she would pause at the window, waiting for a familiar figure to appear. No letters, no calls, only silence. Then, one morning as she was cleaning the medicine cabinet, a small boy approached and handed her a worn envelope, its edges stained with dust. A man told me to give this to you, he said. Her hands shook as she opened it. Alice, if you're reading this, it means I did what needed to be done. They didn't arrest me, they needed me. To end Medcore for good, I have to leave farther than you can imagine. But don't think I'm gone. Every time the wind brushes your roof, you'll hear me there. Live, Alice. Live the way you taught me to, see. A tear slid down her cheek. She folded the letter, pressed it to her heart, and closed her eyes. Outside, snow fell again, light and beautiful as forgiveness. Spring came. The last traces of snow melted, revealing tender green shoots pushing through the earth. Alice stayed in Burlington, still tending to her patients. Every evening, she would sit by the lake behind her house, listening to the wind ripple across the water. One evening, as sunset painted the sky in gold and crimson, she heard footsteps behind her. She thought it was her imagination, until a familiar voice broke the stillness. I thought you'd forgotten me. She turned. Christopher stood there, no black suit, no cold edge of violence in his eyes. Just a man in a simple shirt, his gaze clearer, his smile softer. Christopher, she whispered, breathless. I'm home. She ran to him. He caught her in his arms and held her as if the world might vanish if he let go. Where were you all this time? She asked, tears glistening. In a place where they teach you how to forgive yourself. And did they teach you how to love again? He smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Didn't need to. I never stopped. She laughed through her tears. You're just in time. I was about to plant new flowers, but was missing a woodcutter. Then I'll stay, he said, eyes shining. Forever if you'll let me. Alice leaned against his chest, listening to the heartbeat she thought she'd lost forever. Outside, the wind carried the scent of pine and lake water. 2 souls who had walked through hell had finally found their small piece of heaven. No guns, no blood, no secrets. Just a man carrying the scars of his past, and a woman who had taught him that no matter how cruel life could be, there was always room for redemption. That night, they sat on the porch together, hands intertwined. The fire inside crackled softly. The air was quiet, but alive. Do you remember your list? Alice asked. I do. You forgot the last thing. He raised an eyebrow. What's that number 7 stay? Christopher smiled, squeezing her hand. And I'm never leaving again. Above them, the night sky stretched wide and full of stars reflected in their eyes. At the end of their long escape, they hadn't found safety. They'd found peace. Summer arrived earlier than usual that year. The wind carried the scent of wildflowers and pine resin across the hills. The first genuine warmth after a string of endless winters. And with it came a quiet revival, not just for the land, but for two souls who had once lost each other. The small cabin by the lake looked different now. The old wooden walls were painted pale beige. The front garden bloomed with lavender and white daisies. Laughter from the neighbors' children floated over the picket fence. A sound so ordinary, so peaceful, it was almost impossible to believe this place had once been a refuge for two fugitives running from hell. Alice stood in the kitchen, her hair tied neatly, her face softened by sunlight streaming through the window. She was slicing fruit for breakfast, though her eyes drifted toward the door, where Christopher was bent over a wooden table he had been building himself. He wore a white shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows, and the scar on his left arm was visible under the light. Every time she saw it, something inside her tightened a mix of tenderness and quiet gratitude. "You're cutting it too short again," she called out, half teasing, half serious. Christopher looked up, smirking. "Are you sure you're talking to a man who once took down an entire criminal syndicate?" "Yes," she replied, "but you're losing to a table now." He said the table doesn't shoot back a rare glint of playfulness flashing in his eyes. She laughed light as the breeze. To Christopher, that sound was the most beautiful thing in the world. He had heard too many gunshots, too many screams, but nothing had ever made his heart feel as still and safe as her laughter. That afternoon, they went down to the lake. The water mirrored a sky so clear it felt unreal. Christopher cast his fishing line while Alice sat beside him, her bare feet brushing the cool surface. "Do you remember the first time we sat here like this?" she asked. "The time I almost dropped my gun into the lake, and you blamed me for distracting you. You kissed me. You kissed me first." He turned to her eyes, half amused, half serious. "You sure about that?" "Positive," she said with a slight grin. "I was still shaking then." Christopher chuckled, a rare, unguarded laugh that belonged only to her. After a while, he set the fishing rod aside and looked at her. "Do you ever think, maybe this peace is just the calm before another storm?" She paused, considering. "I used to. But if we keep waiting for storms, we'll never learn how beautiful the sky can be." He nodded slightly, as though accepting that the woman who once feared everything had now become the one teaching him how to believe in tomorrow. Night fell. Moonlight spilled across the lake and into the cabin, painting the floor in silver. Alice sat reading by the fireplace, while Christopher, as always, wrote in the black notebook he never went anywhere without. Writing another list, she asked without looking up. "No. A letter. To whom?" "To the man I used to be." She glanced up, curiosity in her eyes. He continued writing, his voice quiet, as if reciting to himself, "If one day you ever feel unworthy of love, remember that once there was someone who believed in you when the world turned away. She taught you how to smile, forgive, and live. And if you forget why you exist, look toward the lake. Under the summer sky, you'll see golden hair and eyes like sunlight, where you found the rest of your soul." Alice went still. She stepped closer, gently placing a hand on his shoulder. "You don't have to write it down," she whispered. "I'm still here." Christopher smiled faintly, closing the notebook. "Not for you to read, for me to remember." The next morning, they had a visitor. Marcus arrived in a simple gray suit, looking far from the soldier he once was. He handed Christopher a sealed envelope marked with the federal insignia. "Good news," he said, setting it on the table. "The MedCorps case is officially closed. No one's mentioning the name Martinez anymore." "And the bad news?" Christopher asked. Marcus hesitated. "Someone's digging into Petrov's old files. A group of financiers in Europe is trying to rebuild what's left of the network." A chill went down Alice's spine. She turned to Christopher, whose eyes had grown darker, thoughtful. "What will you do?" she asked quietly. "Nothing," he said. "I promised you I'd stop." "But if they—" "No," he interrupted gently but firmly. "If I go back, we'll always be running. And I'm done running. I want us to live." Marcus studied them for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I get it. It may be time I learned how to rest, too." "You could stay a few days," Alice suggested. "We could use another pair of hands, especially someone who can fix a table." Marcus chuckled. "Tempting. But you two already have enough to keep you busy." When he left, Christopher watched his car disappear down the road. He stood silently until Alice approached him and took his hand. "Are you afraid?" she asked. "No," he said quietly. It's just the first time I've ever had something to lose. A few days later, they drove into town for supplies. The little store smelled of baked bread and played soft country music over the radio. Everyone smiled at them, the quiet couple who seemed to bring something warmer than sunlight wherever they went. As they were leaving, Alice noticed a little girl sitting by the door, cradling an injured kitten in her lap. Alice knelt. "What happened, sweetheart?" "A car hit her," the girl said in a small, trembling voice. "I don't know what to do." Alice glanced at Christopher, whose expression softened immediately. Together, they brought the girl and the kitten to the local clinic. As Alice tended to the wound, Christopher watched her steady hands calm, voice eyes full of quiet compassion. He realized then that this was how she made peace with the past, by saving the small, the fragile, the forgotten. The little girl looked up smiling. "Thank you, miss. Thank you, sir." Alice brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. "No need to thank us. Just promise me you'll always be kind." On the way home, Christopher took her hand. He murmured, "If we ever have a daughter, who do you think she'll take after? She'll take after you, stubborn and annoyingly logical." He chuckled. "No, she'll have your eyes. The kind of light that makes even the blind believe the world is still beautiful." That evening, summer rain fell softly over the lake, gentle lingering. They sat on the porch with mugs of tea, listening to the drops tapping against the tin roof. "You never told me why you decided to stay," Christopher said. Alice smiled. "Because I've spent too much of my life running. I wanted to stay for the first time, not for a place, but for a person." "And who's that person? The man who once thought he didn't deserve to be loved." He looked at her eyes deep as the rain-soaked night. He reached out, brushing his thumb against her cheek. "You turned my life into something I never thought I could have, no," she said softly. "You just finally opened the door and let the light in." Later that night, Christopher woke and stepped outside when the rain stopped. The forest hummed with crickets and the stars shimmered across the dark sky. He thought of everything, the blood, the losses, the faces he could never forget. Alice joined him, wrapping a blanket over his shoulders and still thinking. "Yeah," he said quietly. "How did I live long enough to feel this peace?" "Stop thinking," she whispered, resting her head against him. "We've paid enough." He turned and kissed her softly. It wasn't a promise nor passion, it was reconciliation. Between darkness and dawn, between who he had been and who he was becoming. The next morning, the lake lay still as glass. Lavender swayed gently in the breeze. Christopher brewed coffee, the scent filling the little cabin. Alice walked in, her hair loose, a sweater draped over her shoulders. "You know," she said, smiling, "every morning I wake up and still see you here. Maybe fate decided to be kind for once." He set the cup down and met her gaze, voice warm and steady. "No, Alice, it's not fate. It's us. We chose this." Outside, the sunlight streamed through the window, bathing their clasped hands in gold. In a world that had once known only shadows, they had learned the most straightforward truth. You don't need to forget the past to find peace, only someone brave enough to walk through it with you. And in that small cabin by the lake where summer had returned. At last, they knew every storm must one day fade, leaving only the light. That morning, the sky looked freshly washed after a long night of rain. The sunlight fell softly on the lake, reflecting through droplets clinging to the leaves, each glimmering like a diamond. Alice opened the window and drew in a deep breath. The scent of damp grass and pine filled her lungs, the smell of life itself. Far off by the water's edge, Christopher stood in a white shirt, its hem fluttering gently in the breeze. The early light brushed his dark hair and broad shoulders, making him look peaceful and dangerous, like a man carrying two worlds inside him. Alice smiled. She had once feared that man feared his cold eyes the way he controlled everything around him. But now, watching him bathed in morning light, she saw not a weapon, but a man who had fought long enough to deserve rest, finally. She walked over, carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee. "You're up early." Christopher turned, taking one from her hand. "Couldn't sleep." "Another nightmare?" He shook his head, smiling faintly. "No, just thinking about the future." "And what do you see in that future?" she asked, half teasing. He looked at her, his voice low but light as breath. "I see you. And a child running around here laughing so loud, I have to pretend to be angry to make them stop." She laughed. You know you're terrible. Once a dangerous man, you say things that weaken people in the knees. Christopher shrugged. I may have finally learned how to live without a gun. They sat together watching the still water. Far across the lake, seagulls swooped low, tracing graceful arcs across the pale blue sky. After a while, Alice spoke softly. I got the letter from the court. They've reinstated my medical license. Christopher's eyes softened, a quiet pride flickering within them. So my stubborn nurse is finally going back to work. Not the hospital, she smiled. I'm opening my own clinic. Here in town, small but enough to help the people who need it. And I know who the investor will be, he teased. No need, she said firmly. I want to build this with my own hands. I've lived under too many men's shadows, my father's, my ex-husband's, even yours. This time, I want to be Alice Sanders for real. Christopher didn't answer, but his eyes softened, a mix of admiration and something more profound. All right, he said quietly, but if anyone hurts you, you know I won't sit still. I know, she smiled, but this time, I'll stand on my own. The grand opening came in mid-June. The small town had never seen such a crowd. Locals, children, even patients Alice had helped before they all came to celebrate. A simple sign hung above the gate Hope Clinic, where life begins again. Christopher leaned against his car from a distance, watching her in the crowd. Alice wore a white dress, her face glowing in the sunlight, no longer the woman who had once lived in fear. When the ceremony ended, she walked over to him. You're not coming in. I'm ensuring no one tries to hurt the town's new doctor. See anyone suspicious yet? Yes, he said with mock seriousness. A man named Christopher Martinez is drowning in how she looks at him. Alice laughed, the sound softer than summer wind. If you stay out here any longer, people will think you're my bodyguard. Not a bad title, he replied, half teasing. Since guarding you is the only job I plan to keep for life. That evening, they returned to the cabin by the lake. The house glowed with golden light and quiet laughter. Alice placed a bouquet on the table while Christopher opened a bottle of wine, the one he'd promised to save for a special day. You kept your word, she said, pouring it into 2 glasses. Because today you defeated your past. And you, he smiled. I defeated you long ago. She blushed, giving him a mock glare, but her heart felt whole. They clinked glasses, and for a moment, time stood still. After dinner, Christopher took out a small box. I have something for you. Alice opened it. Inside was a delicate teardrop-shaped pendant, simple yet exquisite. It's beautiful. But why a raindrop? Because the rain brought you to me, Christopher said softly, and it washed away everything we were before. Alice touched the pendant, her eyes glimmering. I used to think we would never have met if it hadn't rained that night. No, he said, taking her hand. If not the rain, it would have been the wind. If not the wind, then fate. One way or another, I'd have found you. A week later, while Alice was checking patient records, Marcus called. There's something you should know, Chris. His voice crackled through the line. Petrov's network had a small branch in Miami. They're investigating old connections to Valente Group, and they know about her. Christopher's tone hardened. How long do we have? They're already in the U.S., but it will be a few days at best. He hung up, his expression instantly darkening. Alice noticed. What happened? Nothing serious. Keep working. Please don't lie to me, Christopher. I've been with you long enough to know when you're hiding something. He gripped her hand. I'll protect you even if I have to start all over again. No, she said, shaking her head. We promised no more fighting alone. If the past comes back, we face it together. For the first time, he didn't argue. Instead, he pulled her into his arms. I'm more afraid of losing you than anything else in this world, he whispered. But maybe it's time I believe you're not the woman who needs saving anymore. That night, they drove to Miami. The city shimmered loud, fast, alive, the complete opposite of their quiet lakeside life. As they drove through the neon-lit streets, Christopher explained about the remaining group business people posing as philanthropists, laundering money through medical charities. We're not killing anyone, Alice said firmly. We'll expose them instead. He looked at her and nodded. Light was never my weapon, but it's always been yours. 3 days later, it was over. Documents, recordings, and photos were anonymously delivered to federal investigators. The network collapsed without a single bullet being fired. When the evening news aired, the arrests, Alice squeezed Christopher's hand beneath the table. "See," she whispered. "We can win without blood." Christopher looked at her, and for once something in his eyes was softer than faith. "Maybe you," he said quietly, "are the most potent weapon I've ever had." A month later, they returned to their cabin by the lake. Everything was as they left the trees, the lavender garden, the sunlight spilling through the windows. But something was different. Alice was pregnant. The news came on a rainy afternoon when she sat exhausted at her clinic, and Christopher came to pick her up. She handed him the test result, her lips trembling. "We're having a baby." He stared at the paper, then at her. His eyes filled with light, which only comes once a lifetime. Without a word, he pulled her into his arms, holding her as if afraid she'd disappear. "Thank you," he whispered hoarsely, for giving me another life. A baby's first cry echoed in a small, sunlit room 9 months later. A little girl, pale skin eyes as gray as morning mist, Christopher's eyes. He stood frozen, unable to believe he had heard the sound of life after all the blood and darkness. Alice smiled weakly. "She has your eyes." He kissed her forehead. "And your heart." They named her Liana, meaning light after the storm. 3 years passed. The cabin by the lake now echoed with laughter, the smell of baked bread, and the sound of piano music each afternoon. Alice sat by the window watching Liana draw while Christopher read the news aloud. He had left the underworld, completely becoming an investor in medical and educational programs, things he once could only protect by force. Their lives were no longer a war, but a journey of healing. Alice saved lives, and in doing so healed her own. Christopher was no longer a crime lord, but a husband, a father, a man who had finally learned to love peacefully. That evening they walked to the lake. The breeze was gentle, the water reflecting the fiery sky. Liana ran around them, laughing, her little hands reaching for drifting lavender petals. Alice leaned on Christopher's shoulder. "Do you think this life is enough?" "No," he said with a small smile, "because I want it to last forever." When dusk settled, the three of them sat on the porch, bathed in the soft glow of golden light. Alice whispered, "Do you think people who've lost their way could ever believe in happiness again?" Christopher answered slowly. "If they've seen darkness like we have, they'll understand. No wound is too deep to heal, as long as someone touches it with love." She smiled. "Then I hope our story helps them believe that." He took her hand, looking into her eyes, eyes that once cried under the rain, but now reflected an entire universe of peace. "Then tell our story, Alice," he said softly. "Tell them that sometimes the worst mistake is just the beginning of something beautiful." Outside, a summer drizzle began to fall again, but this time it wasn't cold or frightening. Alice cradled Liana in her arms, while Christopher wrapped a blanket around them. The door closed gently, but the light inside stayed glowing, a warm, steady beacon proof that love always finds its way home, even through storms and darkness. And if you're reading this, perhaps your heart is searching for its own light too. True love isn't perfect, but it always arrives on time. Don't be afraid of the rain, because somewhere within it, someone might be walking toward you, ready to change your life, just as Christopher once found Alice in a storm long ago. If you believe in destiny, leave a share your thoughts and follow for more stories that remind us. Love can still be magic, even in the real world.